The whistle comes twice. That means brakes. In 1882, a freight brakeman standing on top of a moving boxcar at night hears that signal and starts running across the roof of a car, swaying at 30 miles per hour toward the car ahead. He has to reach the handbrake wheel before the engineer runs out of track. He does not always make it. The technology to stop every car in that train simultaneously from a single valve in the locomotive cab already exists. A 22-year-old engineer named George Westinghouse patented it 13 years earlier. The railroad industry has been calculating the cost of installing it ever since. This is the story of a decision the industry made in 1869, repeated in 1893, and repeated again in 2018, and what was left standing when the calculation was finished. Has a decision like that crossed your desk? Drop it in the comments and subscribe to American Ironworks. This is exactly the kind of reckoning we document. George Westinghouse was 19 years old in 1866 when a freight collision near Schenectady, New York, delayed the passenger train he was riding home. He spent the rest of the trip thinking about stopping distances. The problem was one of geometry, scale, and the speed of human response. A locomotive engineer with his hand on the brake valve was the fastest communication link in the system, and his signal traveled at the speed of a whistle through open air, which meant every brakeman received the stop command at a different moment depending on where he stood relative to the engine. The problem was every car behind the locomotive. Stopping a freight train in 1866 required one brakeman per car. The engineer blew the whistle, 2 blasts for brakes, and every man assigned to the train scrambled to his handwheel and began applying manual pressure, car by car, from whatever position he happened to be in when the signal reached him. On a 7-car train at 28 miles per hour, that process required 376 feet. On a longer train, or a faster one, or in winter, or at night, or when a brakeman was on the wrong end of the car, the process required more than the track had left. Westinghouse spent 3 years developing a system that replaced the brakeman with physics. Compressed air, pressurized from the locomotive and running through pipes connected under every car, held each car's brakes in the released position. Drop the pipe pressure, and every brake applies across the train at once. The fail-safe was built into the design. If the brake pipe was severed, a coupling brake, or a runaway separation, the pressure loss was automatic and universal. The brakes applied on every disconnected car without any crew action, a system that failed in a way that stopped the train. He filed the patent on January 23, 1869. He was 22. The railroad industry's response was measured. They called him Crazy George. A Pittsburgh foundry owner named Ralph Bagley believed enough in Westinghouse to commission a formal expert review at his own expense. The consultant accepted $100, studied the plans, and produced a detailed report concluding the air brake was worthless. Bagley read it, tore it up, and burned it. He then funded the prototype himself. The first public test took place in April 1869 on a passenger train from Pittsburgh to Steubenville. Panhandle Railroad executives rode the consist. Westinghouse had to install the system at his own expense, and he agreed in writing to pay for any damage if the brakes failed. As the train emerged from a tunnel under Pittsburgh's Grants Hill, engineer Daniel Tate spotted a horse-drawn wagon stopped at a crossing ahead. The driver lashed the horses. The horses bolted and threw him onto the tracks. Tate turned the Westinghouse valve. The train stopped 10 feet from the driver on the rails. The Panhandle executives were vastly impressed. Westinghouse's father, who had also come to watch, remained skeptical. Westinghouse incorporated the Westinghouse Air Brake Company on September 28, 1869. Among his investors was Alexander J. Cassatt, the future president of the Pennsylvania Railroad. The industry moved toward adoption slowly. In the decade before 1893, more railroad workers died annually than in any American industry except coal mining. The 8 years prior to the Safety Appliance Act killed and injured railroad employees at a rate equal to the industry's full annual payroll. Every worker was effectively replaced once through deaths and injuries over those 8 years. The railroad industry's position through those years was consistent. The cost of retrofitting the full freight car fleet was too high to justify a mandate. That estimate was $40 million. An Iowa Railroad commissioner named Lorenzo Coffin spent 6 years testifying before Congress, presenting the same mortality data to the same committees, and watching the industry present the same cost objections in response. Congress passed the Railroad Safety Appliance Act on March 2, 1893, 24 years after the Westinghouse patent, mandating AAR brakes on all interstate freight equipment. Railroads were given a 7-year grace period. They extended compliance deadlines twice. By 1905, 89,000 locomotives and 2 million cars ran on the Westinghouse system. The company that one paid expert had called worthless was producing 1,000 brake sets per day from a 30-acre plant in Wilmerding, Pennsylvania. George Westinghouse died in 1914 with a corporate empire valued at more than $200 million. His AAR brake became so universal, so physically embedded in the infrastructure of American freight rail, that for the next 100 years, no serious institutional voice proposed replacing it. For 95 years after the Safety Appliance Act took effect, the Westinghouse brake's central mechanical limitation, the sequential propagation of the brake signal down the consist, had been understood, documented, and accepted as the price of universality. Every engineer on every Class 1 railroad knew the physics. What the 2005 FRA study asked was whether that acceptance still made sense. The FRA had commissioned the study. The technology being evaluated had existed in working prototype since the 1990s, and the numbers it produced were not close. The problem with the Westinghouse air brake is not that it fails. The problem is the speed of air. In a conventional freight train brake system, the stopping command travels as a pressure drop through the brake pipe, a continuous line running the length of the consist from locomotive to last car. That pressure drop propagates at approximately 900 feet per second. A standard 150-car freight train runs roughly 9,000 feet from locomotive coupler to rear buffer. At 900 feet per second, the brake signal takes approximately 10 seconds to reach the last car. At 50 miles per hour, 10 seconds equals 733 feet of train still traveling at full speed while the front end is already slowing, the length of 2.5 city blocks of steel pushing forward against cars that are already decelerating. In a 150-car consist, those forces build along the couplers from the rear forward as cars at different positions receive the brake signal at different moments. The front third is decelerating. The rear third is still at line speed. The middle is absorbing the difference. The rear cars don't brake first, they push. John Risch, the National Legislative Director for the SMARTTD Railroad Workers Union, testified before PHMSA in November 2017 that he had personally operated trains with ECP brakes for 30 years. His assessment: ECP brakes were the greatest safety advancement he had seen in 40 years in the railroad industry. ECP brakes replaced the air pressure signal with an electronic one. A train line cable runs the length of the consist. The locomotive sends a digital command. Every car's brake valves receive it simultaneously. The same 9,000-foot train receives the stop signal in approximately 15 microseconds, roughly 600,000 times faster than the pneumatic equivalent. In 2005, the Federal Railroad Administration commissioned Booz Allen Hamilton to study the safety and commercial case for full ECP deployment. The 2006 report called ECP, a tested technology offering major benefits in freight train handling, car maintenance, fuel savings, and network capacity, and concluded deployment could significantly enhance rail safety and efficiency. The FRA's own 2008 cost-benefit analysis estimated full fleet ECP deployment would cost $1.7 billion and produce $9.7 billion in benefits, a nearly 6-to-1 return on investment. Canadian Pacific's ECP-equipped coal trains in British Columbia had already documented stopping distance reductions of up to 60%. Wabtec's commercial ECP4200 system specifies 40 to 60% shorter stopping distances on the longest freight trains. The FRA issued a framework rule for voluntary ECP adoption in October 2008. By June 2016, 4 of the 5 Class 1 railroads that had piloted ECP in revenue service had discontinued using it. One was still running ECP trains. On May 8, 2015, PHMSA issued a final rule requiring all high-hazard flammable unit trains to equip with ECP brakes by January 2021. The industry's response was immediate. The Transportation Technology Center, an organization fully funded by the Association of American Railroads, had previously published presentations citing ECP-controlled brake application, shorter stop distances, and improved safety as documented benefits. That data existed in the AAR's own organizational library. Ed Greenberg, the AAR's spokesman, told reporters in December 2016 that the ECP brake signaling system had been found to break down more often, while not providing significant safety benefits. 2 statements. 1 organization. Different years. Different regulatory environment. The FRA's own numbers showed a 6-to-1 return. Which cost-benefit analysis do you think PHMSA used in 2018? The FAST Act passed in December 2015. Section 7311 required the Department of Transportation to commission an independent National Academy of Sciences study to evaluate ECP brake effectiveness before the mandate could proceed. The study could not be completed on schedule. The Association of American Railroads had submitted a preliminary cost estimate for the required NAS testing, more than $100 million. The NAS wrote that the proposed schedule was highly unlikely to be met. No independent study confirming or refuting the 2015 mandate safety claims was ever delivered to DOT. On September 24, 2018, the Trump administration's Department of Transportation repealed the ECP mandate. The official statement read that the department determined that the expected benefits, including safety benefits of implementing ECP brake system requirements, do not exceed the associated costs and therefore are not economically justified. Senator Charles Schumer stood beside the CSX main freight line in Fonda, New York, 25 days later and called on PHMSA to reverse course. The agency held its position. The Biden administration did not reinstate the mandate. Secretary Pete Buttigieg stated publicly that the department was constrained by law on some areas of rail regulation, specifically citing the braking rule withdrawn in 2018 because of a congressional provision passed in 2015. The mandate was gone. The technology remained voluntary. At 8:54 p.m. on February 3, 2023, Norfolk Southern Freight Train 32N entered East Palestine, Ohio. The consist carried 150 cars. 20 of them held hazardous materials. 14 miles earlier, a trackside sensor had read the wheel bearing on car 23 at 103 degrees Fahrenheit. A Norfolk Southern back-office analyst classified it non-critical. The company's threshold for stopping a train and inspecting a bearing was 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The sensor was reading low. By the time train 32N reached East Palestine, the critical alarm had fired. The bearing had reached 253 degrees Fahrenheit. The engineer applied emergency brakes at 42 miles per hour. 38 cars derailed. 11 of the 20 hazardous material cars left the rails. 3 tank cars were mechanically breached. A fire spread to adjacent equipment. Emergency responders established a 1-mile evacuation perimeter. Approximately 2,000 residents left their homes. 3 days later, the local incident commander ordered a vent and burn of 5 vinyl chloride tank cars. The NTSB later found the decision was based on incomplete and misleading information provided by Norfolk Southern officials and contractors, and that the vent and burn was not necessary to prevent a tank car failure. The NTSB issued its final report on June 25, 2024. The crash, the agency concluded, could have been avoided. The train was not equipped with ECP brakes. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy confirmed that even if the 2015 mandate had remained in force, Train 32N would not have been covered. The rule applied to high-hazard flammable unit trains of 70 or more loaded tank cars carrying defined flammable liquids. Train 32N was a general merchandise freight train. The mandate that was repealed would not have protected East Palestine. The technology that could have shortened the stopping sequence was not required on that train, or on any train that night, or on any train running American freight rail today. The Federal Railroad Administration, as of 2025, states it continues to evaluate the potential for usage of ECP brake equipment to improve railroad safety. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe to American Iron Works. Lorenzo Coffin spent 6 years presenting the same mortality data to the same congressional committees, while the railroad industry presented the same cost objections in response. The industry's $40 million estimate to retrofit the freight car fleet was accurate. The cost-benefit analysis that number anchored did not count the brakemen who died running across car roofs in the dark. In 2008, the FRA calculated a 6-to-1 return on full ECP deployment. In 2018, a narrower analysis covering a smaller hazardous material fleet using revised crude oil traffic projections from the period after 2014. Market downturn found costs exceeding benefits by a factor of 3. The number that changed between those two analyses was the denominator, the volume of cargo the calculation was designed to protect. The number that did not change was the physics of a pressure wave moving at 900 feet per second down a train traveling at 50 miles per hour. Wabtec Corporation was formed in 1999 from the merger of Motive Power and the Westinghouse Air Brake Company. Wabtec manufactures the ECP-4200, the electronically controlled pneumatic brake system that reduces stopping distances by 40 to 60% on the longest freight trains. The company, George Westinghouse, founded in 1869 to sell the air brake, is now selling the technology to replace it. The industry ran this calculation in 1869 with the same cost objections and the same conclusion. Congress overruled them in 1893. They ran it again in 2015 with a more sophisticated version of the same argument, and in 2018, the government agreed with them. Each time the math was defensible. Each time, somebody outside the spreadsheet paid for it. Whether that is a rational, institutional response to genuine economic constraints or a 155-year pattern running on its own momentum, the railroad industry has already answered that question. Twice.